Matt Williams overcame his dyslexia to become a part-time author. His most recent book, Shadow Child, A Story of the Macabre. Well, I wanted to know more about why someone would set a horror story right here in Feckenham. So I managed to speak to Matt recently, and the first thing I wanted to know is, what is this book all about?
It's a possession story, but what it's really about is there's a family living in Feckenham. The daughter of the family is having problems with her children, and she's obsessed that there's something wrong with both or one of her children. And as events unfold, things sort of start to reveal themselves a little bit more, and you learn a little bit more about it all. But there's not too much I can say outside of what the sort of content is. I mean, your shadow child is able to control shadows to manipulate people or manipulate objects. It's sort of twofold, because there's the horror coming from her and the intrigue coming from her, but she can also control people. So people in the village start to go missing or turn up dead or things like that, and the police get involved, and there's a big investigation, and it all sort of spirals out from there, and then it's all revealed at the end what's really going on.
Now, is this all in your imagination, or is it based on some real-life facts?
The place in the opening chapter is based on real-life facts. I did a lot of research into the opening chapter, and the opening chapter is set in the year 1629. I chose that year specifically because that's the year that Feckenham Forest was actually deforested. The opening chapter takes place in a place called Bennett's Bower, which used to be a manorial court that stands where the Feckenham football field now does. Outside of those facts, no, there's not a lot of facts there. It's all an imagination from then on. So I invented a new reason for the forest being deforested.
And the book is based over 300 or so years?
The opening chapter is set in 1629, as I said, but that's really just a series of events going on, just to sort of just inject some real mystery to the book. So that chapter, there's not any characterisation in it as such. It's just a sort of major event that went on in that year, and then we jump forward to, it's actually 2008. And then it's sort of all pretty much in that timeline. There are some flashbacks back to earlier in certain characters' lives at various points, just to fill in some backstory and some things like that with the characters. But the whole book is set in Feckenham, and the whole second half of the book takes place in one night all around Feckenham. So anyone who lives in Feckenham or knows Feckenham well will recognise a lot of the areas. They're not exactly as Feckenham really is, but you know, its artistic licence has to change things a little.
So if you're living in Chapel Cottage down Mill Lane, you better watch out.
Actually, that would be more my first book.
I'll come to that in a moment. Hey, you do say, you're on record as saying that it's a bid, the book is a bid for us to enjoy the dark side of village life. Or what do you mean by that? Do we have a dark side in Feckenham?
No, not really. I think that's more the way journalists put things together. I don't think those are my words, actually. It's just a spin on it. I have a affiliation with dark. I've always enjoyed horror, and I always enjoy that sort of thing. It's no reflection on me as a person, obviously, but I do enjoy that sort of thing. So putting a dark spin on the events going on in Feckenham is something I enjoyed doing.
Now, it's not your first book, and you said that because you wrote one some time ago called The Shady Corner. Has that got ghostly goings-on down Mill Lane?
It's just because I use places that I know well. I hope I don't offend anybody who lives in that house, but the house, in my childhood, you see, I used to come out of the back of my mum's garden and go across the fields and cut all the way down to the mill, and it would bring you in right near that house. Now, I've never been in that house, actually. I've just seen it, but the very, very bottom of Mill Lane.
I know where you are, so tell me about the ghostly goings-on there.
Oh, no, there wasn't ghostly goings-on. I just had some characters living there because it was just part of my imagination and part of my memory as a child, and it was just a nice location to have people living, so that's where I chose some of my characters to live, because the Shady Corner is set in Feckenham again. But the Shady Corner's not really ghostly goings-on. It's more a real person doing bad things for reasons which become clear by the end of the book.
So if people are looking for a good and perhaps interesting familiar read over the summer holiday or for bedtime reading, these are high on the list. You'd recommend them, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. Although bedtime reading, I've been told, is not always the best place to read them. It depends how easily you scare.
And you've got more books in the offing.
Yes, I'm in the middle of writing. I'm actually writing chapter 12 of my third book at the moment, and that is called Talia's Kiss, although that may change.
But as far as the book is concerned, if we want to get hold of a copy, can we pop down to Smith's or Amazon online?
It's available at all good online retailers, Amazon certainly being one of them, but Barnes & Noble and many, many other book retailers sell the book. It is available in hard copy. It's actually sold out in the village shop at the moment because they did have some copies for sale in there. You can order it from any bookshop, but obviously with the way books are going, I think Kindle is the way a lot of people prefer to read these days. So yes, Amazon is your best bet.
And very reasonably priced, I suspect.
£2.99 on Kindle.
We've heard about The Shadow Child, a book about goings-on of a thriller and horror variety in the village. But Matt, if I can, let me take you back to your childhood, because I believe you were born and brought up in Feckenham.
I was, yes. I was born in Evesham Hospital, and I lived in Feckenham for all of my childhood. I attended Feckenham Primary School and Ridgeway Middle School and then the Abbey High School in Redditch. Yeah, I think my affiliation with Feckenham runs extremely deeply, but because I was there all of my childhood life, my dreams often happen there and my thoughts are often there. So, yeah, I tend to find it an easy place to base things.
You still dream about life in the village?
It's not so much that I dream about life in the village. I have dreams, and they just tend to be set there. But I've had that all my life since I left. It's obviously a pining to go back, I think.
Tell me, what was life like in the 1970s and 1980s in the village when you were growing up?
I have to say wonderful. The most wonderful thing about growing up in Feckenham was just the freedom. I think the safety that my parents felt with the fact that everybody in Feckenham knew who I was. I didn't necessarily know who they were, but whenever I was in trouble, they always knew exactly who my parents were. I think my parents had a good peace of mind to let us just go out and be children and enjoy our childhood, which is what we all did. Yeah, it was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed growing up in Feckenham. And
Feckenham First School, did they serve you well?
Oh, extremely well. I think all the schools I attended did well. But yeah, I do have fond memories of Feckenham Primary School. I actually went there just to look at it not too long ago. It's so small.
It is small.
I've really forgotten how small it was, but everything's bigger when you're a child, obviously.
Were the porter cabins there in the 70s and 80s?
No, there weren't, no.
Even smaller then, when you were there?
It was even smaller then, yeah. It was just there was still, I can't forget her name, but there was still somebody living, actually, in the Feckenham School grounds, in between the sort of two halves of the school. You had the two classrooms at one end and the assembly hall at the other, and in between was a house, which was actually behind the headmistress's office block. But there was actually somebody residing on the Feckenham grounds, which was ever so strange for a school.
Did you get into trouble while you were there?
Yeah.
Anything you can tell us about?
No, there was nothing exciting enough to tell you about, really. It's just boys being boys. I don't think I was ever in any serious trouble.
You say that while you were at school, and perhaps even now, well, obviously even now, you struggled or do struggle with dyslexia. So that's quite an achievement to be someone who perhaps wasn't academically minded at school, more technically minded, but has overcome that and become a writer. I mean, that's a very good achievement. How do you manage to do that?
I actually think that being dyslexic has made me become a writer. I was unaware of my dyslexia all the way through school until my very final year at the Abbey High School. And what actually happened is I'd always struggled to read to the class when they make you stand up and read, and it always knocked my confidence because I repeated myself or said things the wrong way. And my writing was always very messy and I'd spell things backwards, and none of my teachers ever picked it up, really. I think when you're young, you make those mistakes anyway, but as I got older, it became apparent to me that there was something not right, and I struggled with it. And then in my final year at the Abbey High School, I had a wonderful teacher called Mrs. Hughes. Within 2 weeks of me being in her English class, she went, "Matt, you're dyslexic, did you know?" And I said, "No." I sort of said to her, "How do I help myself with this?" And she said, "Just keep reading." that sort of got me into reading, because I hadn't really been a big reader because of my issues with reading. I found it difficult. So naturally I already liked horror and things like that, so I started reading Stephen King and James Herbert mainly. Becoming a writer happened a few years later when I was offered a promotion at work. I was worried about my written communication skills, and I thought if reading helped me overcome that side of it, then writing will help me overcome the written side. And I wrote a short story which was, I don't know, maybe 10, 12,000 words, something like that, and didn't think any more of it until a few years later when we were clearing out the loft and I found this short story and read it, and I thought, that's as good as some of the stuff I read. And that actually, I then turned that into a full novel, which became my first novel, The Shady Corner. If anything, without the dyslexia, I may never have found the joy of writing. But I thank it, and it doesn't hinder me anymore. I struggle with it occasionally, but it's just there, and I just deal with it and get on with it. The imagination's the important thing to me.
Is writing your full-time job, or do you do it on the side, so to speak?
I do it on the side, unfortunately. I would very dearly love to write full-time. I would be able to release, I could probably write 2 books a year. I've got tons of stories in my head. It's just all about time, and that's the problem. But I work as an engineering maintenance manager, and I have to do my writing in the few hours I get here and there. So if I can write a chapter every couple of weeks, I'm doing well.
I understand that in your early days, before you became a writer, you wanted to become a rock star. And I think you played at venues of certain very famous rock stars like Iron Maiden.
I was in several bands. I was in a band with a group of friends from school in Ashford Bank, and then I was in a band with my brother. And then I was in a band in Birmingham, which was the band that went on to do reasonably well. We were in a band called Deliverance, and we played venues we did the venues in Birmingham regularly. So we played Edwards Number 8 and Excel's Nightclub and Rock Tavern in Brierley Hill and the City Tavern in the centre of Birmingham. So we did the pub and club circuit for probably 3 years. And we did a Battle of the Bands down in London. It's the Ruskin Arms in London, and it's actually where Iron Maiden started out. So yeah, I did play there, and I was very proud of that. I got to stand where Dave Murray stood.
But now a celebrated author instead. Now, before I let you go, I have to pick up on something that you said earlier on, because here on Swansbrook Radio, we've been following what we call FECDIG, organising a survey of the recreational ground, the football ground, because it's clear that there is some heritage and some building there. And I was interested in what you said about the manorial court, which features in your first chapter of the book, The Shadow Child, in the 17th century. What do you know about the manorial court?
I researched it, and I know that it was there, and the Lord of Coventry resided over it. It was the court that all the traitors of the forest were put in. So people were really jailed in the base of that manorial court for crimes against the vegetation and the animals in the forest. So if you were hunting illegally or you damaged the forest, then you were put in this horrible dungeon. It was a wooden construction, and it was left to rot roughly around the time that Feckenham was deforested. When it actually disappeared, I don't know exactly, but yeah, it was a genuine place. And if you Google it, there are some bits of information out there, but obviously my book varies the story a little.
Author Matt Williams talking to me a little earlier here on Swansbrook Radio. And if you want to know more, you can go to Matt's website. It's quite simple, Matthew Williams Author. That's all one word, MatthewWilliamsAuthor.com. And if you want to buy a book, then I'm sure Amazon will be only too delighted to sell you a copy.